Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. You can check out a few things on there as well. You can check out my book, The Ninth Hour. So you can find that. It'll link you to Amazon. There's a little bit of a description. It might be far enough along that I have a video about it, because I'd rather have a video, because people actually watch videos as opposed to reading things. People don't really read. People do read. I'm being stupid about that. You can check that out. You can also check out my serialized novel. This is a little easier because you don't have to read it. I actually made it for a friend who doesn't read, but it's a serialized novel it's a crime thriller. It's also a revenge story about 5 brothers. I would check that out. It comes out once a month. I am on the 9th chapter now, something like that. And it's good. I like it. It's plugging along. I'm excited because I'm just starting to get into the really good stuff. So definitely check that out. Besides that, is there anything else? I think that's it. So yeah, danielpoppy.com, Poppie. Poppy is spelled Poppie. Our word of the week is ineffable. Ineffable. You can see how it's spelled on the screen, and it is incapable of being expressed in words. And when I think about it, I think most things are incapable of being expressed in words, if you really think about it, but that's just me. I think most things are, you try to express something in words. I keep on bumping the table. You try to express something in words, but you really fall short of actually expressing it in words. So it can be positive, like, incapable of being expressed in words is something good. Or it can be something like you can use it in the negative connotation, unspeakable or taboo. And most things in my life are unspeakable, but that as well. So yeah, ineffable is our word. I hope that you use that word and you forget exactly how to use it, so you use it incorrectly, because that's what I plan on doing. It's always good. It's always a good time. So today we are going to be talking about truth. We're going to be talking about truth, and I think this is an important topic to talk about for people in general. And I think this is an important topic to talk about for artists, for people creating something, because I think that, spoiler alert, I think that people use truth in multiple different ways. And I think that there's a legitimate argument about the term truth and what truth is. What is truth is a common quotation from Pontius Pilate, if you don't know that, which is really interesting. I think that in some cases our culture revolves around this idea of what truth is and what is the truth too. So what is truth, whether truth exists or not, and what that truth is. And it's kind of interesting in the age of the political arena right now. There's so many different, there's different viewpoints that completely disagree about the same exact thing, and it is in some cases very difficult to piece apart what is true in those cases and what isn't. You've got to use your best judgment, and I think that just off the top right away, not related to much of anything else in what I'm talking about, but I would encourage everybody to be very aware of everything that's going around them, everything that's going on around them with politics and different things like that, because politics do definitely affect your life. And if you're someone who says, hey, I don't really care, well, eventually you're going to care. So better to be up on politics right now than later. But we're going to get into truth right now. So the first thing is, when people talk about truth, a lot of people, there's an argument that's legitimate when talking about truth, and there's this argument of whether there is absolute truth. And I think there's 2 camps on this, and maybe there's more. Maybe we should split it up a little bit more, but I'm going to go through those 2 camps. So when people talk about absolute truth, people are talking about things that are immutable, things that do not change, things that are true no matter what happens, right? So there is people who talk about absolute truth, I do not think are unaware of the fact that things can be truth or not based on the circumstances, right? Because we live in a world where things are constantly in flux, it might be the case that It might be the case that Pluto was a planet, and then scientists are like, well, we're not going to classify it as a planet. Well, the fact that Pluto was a planet, the fact that Pluto is a planet is not absolute truth, because how we classify the planets can be different. We could tomorrow scientists could say that there are no other planets except Earth because it's the only one with that contains life. So it could be the case that they suddenly declassify all the planets, and maybe they have good reason to do so, and they believe they have good reason to do so with Pluto, which we'll see. I don't know. Are kids aware of what Pluto is? Are they still aware of Pluto? Because I'm not sure, actually. I've worked around kids a long time. I don't know if they actually are aware of what Pluto is. I've never really asked them. Do they learn that there's 8 planets or 9 planets? So yeah, so that's something that could change, and it's not something that's very important. It's a classification. Okay, let me go back on that. Classifications are important. How you classify things are important, because I think reality does exist, and certain things fit into certain categories in reality. Therefore, we want to best classify how those things in reality work, okay? Especially in relation to people. So what is a human and what isn't a human? If we suddenly start making these generalizations about certain types of people are not human, there's been a lot of things that have happened in the past that are horrible. It happened throughout the past. I'm not actually talking about a specific instance, but the history of humanity has been to say that those people are not really human. Maybe not in those many words, so we can do whatever we want to those people. So I think it's a good thing to, especially in relation to what a human is, understand that classification very clearly. But there's certain things like, okay, what a planet is, it's not going to affect us a lot. But absolute truth is things that are unchanging, okay? And the things that are unchanging and things that are changing can get mixed up. So it could be the case that someone, it's easy to get confused, and you've always got to be thinking about these things, and you've always got to be pushing forward and trying to best understand the world around you, okay? Here's a good way to understand something. So when you talk about formal logic, and this won't be very difficult, there are 2 different things in formal logic that sometimes get confused. There are terms, or what something is called, and there are concepts, what something is. And the best example I can give you for this is that terms, dog is a term. Dog is a name we give something. Name we give a specific animal in reality. Now, other languages have different words, different names for dog, right? Each of them has their own word or name for a dog. It doesn't probably sound the same. Maybe in some languages it sounds the same, but it doesn't sound the same as the English word. It's a different word, but the actual dog, what a dog is, remains the same. Okay, and there's more complexity to that. I'm not going to get into it, but that concept is absolute truth. And if something is something, we should try to use the term that best fits with what that thing is. Okay. If something is not something, we should try to use a term that doesn't, we shouldn't use that term, right? So Pluto should be classified as a planet based on what a planet actually is. The concept of a planet, we should classify Pluto as a planet and call it a planet. If it doesn't fit into what is best understood as a planet, we should not classify it as a planet. But certain things like dog is a bit easier to understand. Now, if I suddenly started classifying a dog as a feline, that's an issue because I'm distorting reality, because we have a specific concept of what a feline is or a cat is. And if we start to call a dog a cat, then we're lying to ourselves. If we start to understand, or we say, oh, that is actually a cat, as in a concept of a cat, not just the term cat, but the concept of a cat, we're lying to ourselves because we know a dog is not a cat. Okay? So there are certain things that are absolute truth. If you didn't understand that, here's a bit more. So like things like mathematics, I think are what people look to when they're talking about absolute truth. So 2 + 2 is 5 no matter what. A triangle is a triangle no matter what. It's a triangle is an object with three sides whose inside angles add up to 180. I think I've got that right. Or this I think comes across with religious people when they talk about God. So with God, it must be the case that either God exists or God does not exist. God cannot both exist and not exist at the same time. So you're running into something that is very immutable and something that cannot change, something that remains true all the time. That's absolute truth. There are certain other things that come into existence that I think you could classify as absolute truth, if this makes sense. So the fact that the Civil War was fought is absolute truth now. I think you'd class it is truth. It is true. It's never going to change that the Civil War in the United States specifically was fought, right? It's not going to change. The history is not going to change. Somebody's going to create a time machine and change history, and then I'm going to be proven wrong. But yeah, so that's where we're going. So we've got people who believe there are certain things that are true no matter what, if that makes sense. And then on the other side of that real argument is people who believe there isn't actually truth. There is no such thing as absolute truth. Truth is relative. Truth is based on our experiences. Without us, without our experiences, without our subjective reality, that we create reality in the end, actually. So we create reality, and because we create reality, truth is a part of that reality, and therefore truth is subjective, and therefore absolute truth does not exist. And maybe that'll clarify what absolute truth is more to you. But these people would be called postmodernists. I'm not a postmodernist. I don't think it's a good idea. I think first, if somebody is a postmodernist and they're trying to use logic to argue postmodernism, they are undercutting their own argument, because they are saying that truth doesn't actually exist, but they're trying to stand on something that they're trying to stand on a system they say doesn't actually exist and is actually subjective according to our own reality. So I think that if they try to do that, they undercut their own argument. And I think it's also the case that if they don't use logic, they don't get anywhere with their arguments. Their arguments don't go anywhere. And what happens with their arguments is they end up being, in some cases, these arguments that are presented in a way that is elitist. Does that make sense? So they're presented in a way that these people are better than you, and you don't understand what they're talking about because you're not intelligent enough. This happens in art a lot for whatever godforsaken reason. This happens in art a lot, especially in more common art. There's certain art that you walk in, and the common person would say that is the ugliest thing I've seen in my life. My kid can make better art than that. That should probably be in a trash can. Actually, there was art in some, what was it? There was a museum, and it had some modern art, and the people cleaning up the museum threw it away. They threw away the modern art because they thought it was trash. But what happens, my point is that there are certain people who will present a specific piece of modern art, and to the majority of the human population, they're saying, this is trash. And people who are elitists in the modern art community or in the art community in general will say, no, you just don't understand it. You're not intelligent enough to understand this. But I actually think that those people who are saying, this is kind of trash, this isn't really art, are the ones who are right. Why are they the ones who are right? First, you don't need to have an IQ of 180. You don't need an IQ of 100. You don't need an IQ of 160. You don't need an IQ of 140 or 120 or 100 to understand what art is experientially, to have an experience from a piece of art. Art is something we create based off of our human experiences to better understand human experience, to express our human experiences, to express ideas, to express concepts, but generally just to express that experiential side of humanity. Okay, you can argue with me about whether that's a good definition for art. I think it is. I think it's the best one I've run into, that it is embedded in the human experience. And if art is embedded in the human experience, if the majority of the human population is saying that your art is trash and there is nothing good about it, it might be the case that you actually haven't connected to the human experience. You've connected to the disgust experience of humans, but that's about it. And maybe you'll say, well, that's art because, I've just because you rebel against something, and just because you seem to be iconoclastic, just because you seem to be fighting against a system, doesn't mean you're actually making anything good. The side note, a lot of people think that just because they're rebelling, they're making something good, which isn't true. People think that just because they're tearing down something, they're making something good. It isn't true. It isn't true. You have to have something better to put in its place if you're actually going to be tearing something down. If you're rebelling against something, or that thing actually has to be evil. So if you're rebelling against something good, you might be the evil one, right? Or the bad one. Let's just put it in relativistic terms. If you're rebelling against something good, you might be the bad one, right? You might be the baddies, as the meme goes. I think that's Monty Python. What is that from? Is that Monty Python? It's some British show, I'm pretty sure. I haven't actually seen where it comes from, but I know the meme. But yeah, so if you're rebelling against something good, if you're tearing something down and you have nothing to put in its place, you might want to reconsider tearing it down until you have something better to put in its place. Examples from history. When the French Revolution happened, which was very close to the American Revolution, everything was torn down, and they really didn't have anything to put in its place, and it turned into a bloodbath. They just killed a lot of people. And you compare that to the American Revolution, where they tear something down, they get rid of Britain. They actually have something to put in its place. That is going to be better, more successful. And especially if it's a good thing, put something good in its place. Don't be Adolf Hitler, who had the same idea. Actually, he had the same idea where you're going to undermine the government from the inside, but while you undermine the government, you're actually building a government. You're building a government by yourself that you can put into place. You want to put something good in its place. So if you're tearing down traditional art, you're saying it's nothing, you're saying it's trash. You want something actually good to put in its place. Don't be the Adolf Hitler of art, or the Stalin of art. Do not be the dictators of art who destroy everything and take everything over and then don't let anybody do anything besides what they're doing. So I'm not saying that you can't create something that is rebellious. I'm not saying that you can't create something that is grotesque, I guess. I think that you should be allowed to create it. I think to a certain degree there's value in it. I think there's little value in creating something subversive for the sake of it being subversive. That's probably my one caveat. You're creating something subversive for the sake of it being subversive. So in art, people say, oh, this is amazing, you just don't understand it. And I think it's kind of the same thing that postmodernists do when they present their arguments. Some postmodernists, I don't know if all do it, but you have these arguments that are like, oh, you just don't understand it because you're not intelligent enough. But I have great faith in regular people to understand logic. I think logic is a very basic thing. I think logic is something that almost everybody could understand, almost everybody can implement in their lives, almost everybody. I think it would very much improve your life. I think it would very much improve your life from someone who just works a menial job to someone who is a CEO of $1 billion corporation. I think it's definitely going to help your life and make it improve. So that's the argument within the sphere of truth. That's the argument about truth that is relevant. That is an actual argument that either absolute truth exists or truth is just relative. Relative, I think is how you'd say it. I just can't talk. The second thing, the other way truth is used by people who are creative. Okay, and I'm going to actually push for using, because I don't like miscommunication. I don't like ambiguity. Here's one thing. Okay. I'll just explain how people who are creative and in the arts use truth. People who are creative in the arts use truth in a different way. So there is a difference, and I think everybody understands that there's a difference between truth and truthfulness, right? Truth has to do with the absolute truth, right? What is actually the case apart from me, right? It's objectively the case, okay? Then there is truthfulness, and truthfulness has very much to do with the person. And when I say, and I've said this so many times, when I say your art should try to seek out truth, what I'm trying to say is your art should try to seek out truthfulness. Now, it goes a little bit beyond that when I'm saying that. And I think it goes a little bit beyond that when artists generally talk about it. But I think that when artists talk about truth, a lot of times they run into this idea of something more subjective because they're dealing with actual human experiences, and actual human experiences are not objective. They're subjective. They're very muddy. They're very there's a lot of issues with them. We have to go through a lens of, first of all, you might not be seeing objective reality because you're colorblind, because you're blind, etc. Different people have different viewpoints based on their ideas. I've said that a million times. Different people have different viewpoints based on how they grew up, what experiences they've had. But when you are writing, when you are creating art, you are trying to be truthful in your art. You're trying to best present those experiences, that human experience. Like I've said in the past, you're trying to take an experience out of your mind and you're trying to put it in somebody else's mind through what you're creating. You're trying to do that the best you're able to with those subjective human experiences, with that experiential part of reality. I think that in the end, you are trying to get to some type of absolute truth. You're trying to get to an objective reality. But I think that art that is good is humble in how it presents itself. And I think it's humble in how it presents itself because I think pieces of art that are very good are understanding of the fact that they are not presenting something that is objectively true. I think that art that really gets to the core of who is human or what it is to be human, because I think that is the core of what we're trying to figure out with art. But I think that art that gets to the core of what is human or what it is to be human, that human experience, is art that understands that it is limited in scope. I think art that thinks it has all the answers doesn't do as good of a job. And I think that you see this in art that tries to push ideologies. I've picked on very cheesy Christian movies in the past, and they're very obvious in this. Very cheesy Christian movies have this idea that they have an absolute truth, right? And they believe, people creating these movies, some of these movies, believe that you must push this absolute truth in a way that is preachy. But the medium of the movie, of the film that they're using, that art form is meant to tell a story. And storytelling is storytelling in its purest form is not preachy. It can have somebody preaching in it, but it's not something that tries to present a logical argument or a sermon. It's something that tries to make someone experience something. It tries to make someone experience a story. It tries to make someone experience a narrative. And you can be truthful in your narrative while still lying. You can match, and this is where I'm really going, you can match your lying narrative to the truth, right? So you can be presenting a narrative that's meant to sway people toward a lie, but you present it in a way that is connected to reality in specific ways. That's a bit complicated, but the goal of making good art, and I guess I'll sum this up once again. The goal of making good art is to be truthful in how you're making that art. The goal of making a good story is trying to be truthful in how you're telling that story. You're trying to present that story so that someone understands what's going on as if they were there themselves, right? The end goal behind all that, I think, is to get to what the actual objective truth is, but you still have to have that truthful aspect in a story. Otherwise, it's not good art. You can have the weird thing about this is that you can have art, you can have a story that is extremely engaging, that people walk away from and they're like, wow, that was amazing, that was so great, and it can be a lie. You can create something like that because you know how reality works. which is really bizarre if you think about it. If you know how reality works, if you understand reality, or you at least see it clearly, where you can take it and you can put it on a page and you can actually tell a lie through a story. So you're lying, but you kind of know the truth. You kind of know that this isn't the case. You can tell it in a way that's truthful so that people believe it and they're connected emotionally. And there's true emotions in them that sway them toward your ideas, but you can still be telling a lie. So I think in the end, be truthful, always tell the truth, but it isn't trying to preach. In the end, you're not trying to preach, because if you're trying to preach in a story, you're undermining what a story is. In the end, you might be presenting ideas to people, but you're not trying to convince someone of something. You definitely can convince someone of a specific idea. But I just don't think I don't think that's what stories are here for. I don't know. Okay, so let me go over this again. I think stories are here to be truthful, to tell the truth about reality. Now, if reality aligns with a specific ideology, then that reality will come across in stories, no matter how much the person is trying to lie through their story. People can still be led astray by the lie people are telling in their story, but I think that reality and truth is going to come across. And I think that's what's so powerful about stories, is that you're not just trying to outright say what is the truth. You're trying to present it as it actually exists in reality. Okay, and I hope I've said that well. People disagree about what the truth of things are, but I think that when you're doing something, when you're going about writing, you're getting to a certain place in a more roundabout way, but you need to get to that place in that roundabout way, because if you didn't do it, it wouldn't work. I heard an author, he's like, yeah, I have a lot of people ask me, they're like, oh, why did you write what's this book about? And he's like, well, if I knew what the book was about, I wouldn't have spent 300 pages writing the book. And I think that best sums up what we're trying to get to. I don't know. So yeah, so that maybe that's the best way to understand it. Where I'm at. Oh man, I'm actually under time. So there's two different types of ways of using truth, and I think that we need to understand that. And maybe we need to start saying, oh, be truthful in your art, instead of your art needs to have truth in it. Your art needs to be the truth, right? Because I think that truthfulness has to deal with our subjective human experiences, and I think truth has to deal with objective reality, which are not necessarily the same thing. There was one other thing I was going to talk about, but it just slipped my mind. I just had it in my mind. It's gone now. But yeah, truthfulness. This is what I was going to say. There's a saying that people often say, they're like, I may be wrong, but I'm not lying, right? I may be wrong, but I'm not lying. And what people mean by that is to the best of their knowledge, they're telling the truth. They are being truthful to the best of their knowledge. They're not trying to hoodwink you. They're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Any more cliches like that? They're not trying to tell you a lie. They're not trying to deceive you. To the best of their knowledge, they're telling you the truth. They might not have the correct information, which I think happens to humans a lot. And I think if we started to understand ourselves as being very finite, very limited, if we started to understand ourselves as being, we have such capacity. That's the thing. Humans are capable of so many things. Humans are capable, if we wanted to, I'm sure we could figure out a way to dig up all of Mount Everest. I'm sure of it. I think that we're going to end up probably living, having bases on Mars, maybe living on Mars. Maybe we might in the future have the capability of terraforming different planets. You know, there's things in science fiction that people are like, yeah, right, that's never going to happen. But there's amazing things that are already happening. So humans have this unbelievable capacity to do so many things. We are probably going to be able to regrow limbs. We already have regrown organs. We've already grown organs with stem cells. We might be capable of creating something that is able to interact with us in a way that as if it were alive. I'm not going to say it's alive or not, but AI, it might be the case that we can't distinguish it from an actual human. There's so many. You just have to look at the art, look at the architecture, look at everything that people have built, look at how things are maintained. People keep on going forward. People keep on maintaining things. People build stuff. And people maintain stuff, right? There's people who climb up on huge power lines to make sure you have electricity. There's people who climb up on those huge, I don't know what you call them, those towers, those cell phone towers, to make sure you have the ability to call people. There's people who tend forests and make sure, hey, these forests are growing the best they're able to, crops, etc. People stay fed. It's amazing how it works and it all fits together. But at the same time, we are very finite. We're very limited, and I think that some people, and maybe we can just say everybody. I think everybody at some point thinks they're better than they are, or thinks they're smarter than they are, or thinks they're more capable or wiser, or whatever positive trait than they are. When in reality, they're very limited. They only have a tiny sliver of reality that they're seeing, and I think that people should come to truth, and I think people should come to what they understand to be the truth with humility. And I don't think that people should say, oh, I don't believe there is a truth, and I don't think people should say, oh, it's a lost cause. I think people should diligently seek it out, but at the same time, I think that people should be humble about that. And if somebody does have a different perspective, a different idea than them, I think it's good to be like, why do you have that idea? Because maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm missing something. And I think that's a good thing. I think it puts people in their place. I don't think it's good to feel badly about yourself, to feel you're horrible. I don't think it's good to be like, well, I'm the worst person in existence. But I definitely think it's good to understand that people are not perfect. I think it's good to understand that people are limited, that you have a very short time on earth. And I think if we do this, and I think if people had a bit of humility with what they believe to be absolute truth, with what they believe to be the truth, with what they believe to be the best way to go about things, I think that we'd probably have a better society. Because you can't convince a man against his will, right? There's a saying, I think it's Benjamin Franklin, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. People do not believe things if they're coerced to believe them, right? They may hold on to some form of belief in that thing, but if you're using a scare tactic or you're shaming people to believe that thing, they're probably just going to be like, I really don't believe it, but I'll put on a face. And I think it's always good to have open dialogue about things. And so understand who you are. Understand that you're finite. Understand that you have a lot of capabilities. You probably are not doing as much as you're capable of. And understand that art is something you're trying to be truthful with, something you're trying to be truthful with to get to that objective truth. But you got to be truthful with it and don't preach. Congratulations, you got to the end of my podcast. So you either had to listen to my voice or you had to listen to my voice and watch my face, which I don't envy you. Let's just say that. But if you're someone who likes this podcast and you're thinking, I'd like to support him in this podcast or the other creative things I'm doing, there's a few things you can do, because some people don't know what they can do to support people who create stuff. So these are the few things you can do that will really, really help me. First of all, check out my website. Check out the other things I'm doing. Second, comment on things, share them, like them, subscribe. Subscribe if you haven't already. And the third thing you can do is give reviews on different places, all right? So the biggest thing for this podcast is going on to iTunes, giving it an honest review, telling people why you like it, telling people why you hate my voice, why you hate my face, but telling people why they should really check it out, despite the fact that I have so many failings in terms of looks and voice. other than that, if you want to check out my books, grab a copy of the book and listen to the serialized novel. Give digital copies away. That's a really big thing too. I always want to give you something that is valuable to you. I always want to give someone listening to this podcast something that's going to stick with them, or a book that they can actually own. And you can own that book for very, very cheap. So go check that out on Amazon. The different things I said: subscribe, upvote, comment, share, and definitely give it a review on iTunes. All right, as always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.